Pod bay doors, Colin.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Welcome to the Tame Aperture podcast, where we discuss all things movies from first-time directors, indie, art house, and much, much more. Today on the podcast, we talk the sophomore release from Irish-British playwright, screenwriter, and director Martin McDonagh and his 2012 film 7 Psychopaths, starring Colin Farrel, Sam Rockwell, Woody Harrelson, and Christopher Walken, with a special appearance by musician-actor Tom Waits. Screenwriter Marty works to finish his newest screenplay, while his best friend Billy and associate Hans work to make money by kidnapping dogs and returning them to their owners for the reward. As Marty falls deeper into alcoholism and struggles to defy Hollywood stereotypes in his latest movie, Billy gets into it deep after kidnapping a local mafia leader's precious dog, Bonnie, and it all comes to a head when Marty, Billy, and Hans drive to the desert to help Marty finish his screenplay, and he finds out his best friend Billy isn't quite who he thought he was. I mean, after all, he just wanted to help his friend finish his movie. The film debuted at the 2012 Toronto International Film Festival, winning the People Choice Award, Midnight Madness, and was later released in North America in October, opening to just over 1,400 screens on an estimated budget of $15 million. I'm Gabe Vienendahl, filmmaker, film instructor, and movie enthusiast, and I'm joined today by my partner in crime, Mr. Alan Martindale, veteran podcaster and editor. Alan, how the hell are you?
Hey, man, anytime I get to see Colin Farrell's eyebrows, I'm a happy man.
If I've ever seen anybody act through their eyebrows, it's Colin Farrell.
He's so good at it. He's so good. And he's got those big, bushy eyebrows. I have them, too, so I can say that. But he is so expressive in just the movement of his eyebrows.
You have them, but can you do what he does with them?
I wish. If I could, I'd be a millionaire right now. I'd be in Hollywood.
I picked this movie. I wanted to first get a little bit of your relationship to the movie. Like, have you seen it before? And before we dig deeper, like, what were your initial impressions about the film?
I've seen it before, and I really liked it. So I was happy when you chose to do this one. Watching it back, I've actually watched it let's say 2.5 times now, because we were originally going to do it last week. We had some complications. So just to do a refresher, I kind of rewatched most of it, and I loved it more even this third viewing. I got a lot of the jokes that I didn't get before. I kind of picked up on the nuances of the characters. It's just really good, and the meta nature of this movie is it gets a little wonky there in the middle, I think. Maybe not wonky, we'll kind of get into it, but overall, I think this is a fun movie. The cast is the perfect cast. Like, if you would have told me, let's get Christopher Walken, let's get Colin Farrel, Sam Rockwell, Woody Harrelson. They don't seem like a type of cast that would mesh together very well, but they're all perfectly cast in their roles, and I thought they did a great job. I
mean, that cast is amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that he was able to pull all, those are all huge. Those are like, he's swinging. Those are all all-stars.
Oh, wait. And before we dive into, I got to ask you. So are we putting Christopher Walken on the National Treasure list?
I think so.
I think we kind of have to.
I think he's got to go on.
I'm writing it down. He's going on officially.
Especially, of course, watching it and seeing him again in this, but then just anytime the fact that people can say Christopher Walken and then they can get into a voice and a demeanor, and he's stylized and identified himself the way he does. Like, he's got to be on that list.
Well, and the thing I love about him in this movie is he has like the Christopher Walken thing going on, but he's so much more than that caricature that people paint of him. Like, He's so much more than the impression people do. He's actually a damn good actor, and he can, like, my favorite parts in this movie are the parts when he's with his wife. Like, that's fun, and it's sweet, and it's tender. And then, after the tragedy happens to her and his reaction when he's sitting there with Woody Harrelson, he says so much in a look, and you don't, like, when you just think of Christopher Walken, you think of, the weird kookiness, like Pulp Fiction, his role in Pulp Fiction. You think of that. But he is so much better than that caricature.
No, absolutely. The other thing is, what makes him fun is that he's identified himself in that caricature. So even though he can step outside of that, like you're saying, the fact that he's so distinguishable by his mannerisms and the way that he portrays himself, that is uniquely him. I think that's what makes, any actor is trying to identify that way. Like they're trying to break loose of any potential stereotypes. And he's kind of become, I guess, in some ways his own stereotype, but it's all based on his previous performances.
Right.
But like you said, I think he's on the spectrum. He can step outside of that and hit those other notes that maybe you don't expect when you initially hear Christopher Walken.
Right.
No, he's great. I love him.
Yeah, he is a national treasure. I'm glad you're okay with that.
We're putting him on the list.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm trying to remember the run through of the list.
I got it right here. So we have Dennis Hopper, Samuel L. Jackson, Jack Nicholson, Martin Sheen, Bill Murray, and Christopher Walken.
That's a pretty good list.
It's a good list. Good. Yeah.
I think I'd watch any movie that any of them are in at any time.
And I like it because we're not taking this list lightly. Like we're not just throwing anyone on there. This is important stuff here.
I think I tried to slide someone in once, and you kind of refrained me.
Sounds like me.
So I chose this movie. This was on me this time, and a couple of reasons. I'll just dive into it, like kind of my relationship to the movie and what kind of appealed to me about what it is. And it always kind of, I do a lot of research, whether I'm trying to teach a class or like try to find particular cases to show people what's out there and what's available and how to kind of look at stories in a different way. And this happened like maybe 8 years ago. I was teaching this short form production class, and I was looking at Academy Award winning short films. And I was trying to show how to tell a narrative in a short frame of time. And I happened to run across a film called Six Shooter. Have you ever seen this short film?
No, I've heard of it though.
And literally for the last 8 years, I've shown this film in every class I've taught. And when I had seen it, I didn't initially look at the director. A lot of times we'll watch a film, and now especially you and me and we'll kind of look and see who directed the film. But when I started showing it in class, I just showed it because I thought it was really well put together and kind of uniquely different. It had its own special voice. So I started showing it in class. And then as a result of that, I started to kind of fall into who the filmmaker was. And maybe like a year into showing this in this class, a fellow, and you know who this is, Matt Jesperson. Mm-hmm. So he's an instructor, and he was talking to me about a film called In Bruges. And I said, I haven't seen In Bruges. This was years ago, like 8 years ago, right? 9 years ago. I said, I haven't seen In Bruges, but he said, well, it's directed by this guy named Martin McDonagh. And I was like, well, that's the guy that I've been showing for the last year in this class, his short film. So I've got to go watch In Bruges, right? Because I love the short film. And it all started coming together. And then, of course, once you watch the short film and then you watch In Bruges, and now it leads into this film, right? You just if you like that filmmaker, it resonates with you, you're going to want to see everything that they make.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing. If you can't tell, I'm completely immersed and infatuated with Martin McDonagh. I think he's fantastic. So much so that I started, Jesperson and we start reading his plays. I bought his plays online. I read The Pillow Man, and I read Beheading in Spokane. These are two plays that he's written that eventually ended up on Broadway. But it just resonated so strongly, and it all started with kind of a little research into how to tell stories in the short form. And so it led to this, and Seven Psychopaths being the sophomore release to In Bruges. In Bruges was a podcast number 2 that we did right before you jumped on board with us. And I think we've mentioned this before. I gave it a 10 out of 10.
In Bruges is one of my all-time favorite movies. And I actually had no idea until watching Seven Psychopaths for this podcast that Martin McDonagh did In Bruges and also did 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. I had no idea he did those, and I love both those movies.
3 Billboards was amazing.
It was incredible. Amazing. It was incredible. I mean, Woody Harrelson in that movie, holy shit, man. When
that movie came out, I was teaching in Los Angeles. I told my class when it came out, the day it came out, I went to class the next day. I told my class, I said, I'm calling it right here. I'm getting Miss Chloe on you. And I'm calling Frances McDormand for Best Actor or Best Actress.
Mm-hmm.
And flash forward, that's like September, October, flash forward to January, February, and she wins it. Because that movie and her performance and the way that character is written is so good.
It's everything about that movie is amazing. I mean,
I saw an interview with him, with Martin McDonagh, and they were talking about Seven Psychopaths and a little bit of research I was doing for this. And he mentions Three Billboards. When Seven Psychopaths came out and he was doing the press junket, he was talking about another film that he had already written. So this came out in 2012, Seven Psychopaths. And he was talking about his next follow-up film, which didn't come out till 2017, 2018, I think, which was Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. And he had already written it. So it was already written. It had been written for years. And he specifically said in relation to Seven Psychopaths that this film will have a strong female protagonist. He's talking about Three Billboards. Because when you watch Seven Psychopaths, he's alluding to the fact that there are very little films, or at least kind of even action-oriented films or any kind of Hollywood film that has a female protagonist.
Mm-hmm. Well, I took it almost as a critique of himself, that line of dialogue when Christopher Walken says, your women characters are terrible. You know, like most women I know can string more than two sentences together. I kind of took that as a critique on himself. And so I'm glad that he followed it up. Three Billboards is such a different movie than either this or In Bruges. This and In Bruges are different, but they have some similarities. But I mean, that's like a whole other world. And for him to be able to do that, to step out into that world is just insane, especially like writing such a small town America so well. And he's British, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for him to be able to do that, he's just immensely talented from the three movies I've seen from him. Anything he does, I'm in 100%.
I'm with you on that. And I think we're on the same page. So let's dive into Seven Psychopaths a little bit more and kind of break it down. Give me a little bit of, I don't want to get into like favorite scenes necessarily, but just kind of and you mentioned this before, but an overall kind of character perspective, or if we were to dive into any of the psychopaths, as we know there are 7, or technically 6, which ones stood out, or which parts of the story you liked most about that?
I think technically there are only really 2.
That's true.
Or maybe 3, maybe. The Quaker, who's, based on Christopher Walken's character, maybe. I don't know. But like the opening scene. I mean, first of all, let me say this. If you're going to go into this movie, don't have any expectations, because I think that's kind of the point of the movie. Like it almost feels like it's going to be a Guy Ritchie type thing at first. Like you got the mob guys, you think it's going to be like a violent thing. It's called Seven Psychopaths. And in the first scene, he just subverts your expectations immediately. Like you think you know what it's going to be, and it's something totally different. Like you think these 2 characters on the bridge are going to be characters that are going to be important going forward, and they're shot within 5 minutes, less than that actually, and it's done in such a great long shot, and you kind of notice the Jack of Diamonds coming up from behind him, and you see him, and as he gets closer, you're like, man, is that a red mask? What's going on here? And all of a sudden pulls out 2 guns, shoots the guys. And I loved the dialogue going into that double murder. I loved everything about that opening scene. And it's just such a crazy good introduction to this world. And it just tells you that just subvert your expectations, because there's nothing, you're going to think you know what this movie is, and it's not that at all.
Yeah, and he's also, and you mentioned this before, I mean, it's so meta. It's kind of referring to itself. It's looking at conventions of a genre or conventions of storytelling in Hollywood. What I find interesting about that scene is 2 things for me. One is the opening shot is the Hollywood sign. Mm-hmm. And it pans over to these 2 gangsters that you're referring to. And as soon as it pans over to these gangsters, they're having this discussion. They're talking about movies. They're talking about The Godfather. They're talking about guys getting shot in the eye.
John Dillinger and yeah.
Yeah. And so immediately it's for me, and I don't want to. I'm never one to like. I mean, I am and I'm not. I hate to break things down like I know what they mean exactly because I don't. But at the same time, there's something interesting about the way he opens the movie, which is here's Hollywood. I'm showing you the actual symbol of Hollywood, right? That signifies to people's eye what everything means. You see the Hollywood sign, and we have ideas about what that is. I'm panning over. These guys are talking about movies like we are now in some sense, but a little different. And then they get taken out. And I think, like you're saying, subvert your expectations, because ultimately what he's saying is everything that's conventionalized in Hollywood and what you think is going to happen because you see that sign, it's going to not be there. It's not. And also, if it is there, I'm going to poke fun of it, and it's going to be very meta in its references.
I mean, he even says outright, Colin Farrell's character says, I don't want this just to be another movie with a bunch of violence and guns and dudes holding guns, you know, like it's, I think it is commenting on Hollywood, and it is commenting on, you know, not giving you exactly what you want. I mean, he talks about how he wants his main characters, you know, the opening is just, you know, it's violence and it's carnage. And then rather than having a big shootout, they just ride off into the sunset, you know, and they go out into the desert and talk. And then that's exactly what happens in the movie.
Yeah, everything that ends up happening in a future tense is something that a character mentioned, or almost everything is something that a character mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to this opening scene, this red cover, you know, red mask comes up. Jacko Diamonds shoots these two gangsters, and immediately we get a still frame that says "Psychopath number 1." And so even though your expectations are subverted, or you're not sure, there's a big intrigue into what's going to happen, because you start out with, and we have this kind of fascination with violence to some extent, and when we see that, we're immediately kind of drawn in. No, I was actually like, okay, I'm kind of interested in what's going to happen here.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's I think that's kind of the allure of it, and that's why I say it gets a little wonky later on. It doesn't get wonky. It just turns into something a little bit different. It's still good, but it's not the same movie. It feels like I'm watching a different movie at times.
Yeah.
Like I feel like he kind of lost track of the story, and I don't know exactly which story we're supposed to be mostly invested in. Are we supposed to be invested in the dog kidnapping and that whole story with Woody Harrelson, or are we supposed to be more invested in the fact that they're writing a movie together? And I'm not quite sure. And I understand what he's doing. I wish there would have been a little bit more focus or emphasis on one of them.
Which one did you want to follow?
Oh, I wanted to follow Woody Harrelson, because that was fun the entire time. And I mean, the movie stuff is great. There's some great stuff in there, but it just feels like it's leading up to something, and then it just kind of pitters out. And it's funny and it's charming, but it just feels like a different movie when they're in the desert.
I think, the tonality completely changes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's interesting that you kind of look at the characters and you have these kind of A and B line stories that end up converging later on. I mean, it seems traditional to me in a sense of storytelling, and I'm no master screenwriter like frickin' Martin McDonagh, but the idea that I'll kind of build one A-line story here, one parallel story here, and ultimately in some essence they're going to converge. He does that, and I think he does it quite eloquently. It kind of works out towards the end, although I can see what you're saying, which is like as you're going along, like maybe there's a bit of confusion on where to go or kind of who to track to, you know?
Yeah, and it feels like just between this and In Bruges, it feels like he's got a real aversion to violence. It almost, and this is kind of, I mean, this is totally my theory, my opinion, but based on what I saw in Seven Psychopaths, it feels like he almost feels like he has to throw that stuff in there. Like In Bruges is a story about the dangers of violence and you know, the aftermath of violence and the hell and the pain that it causes people. And this is all about how he's trying to avoid violence in a movie about psychopaths. So it's an interesting thing that he's doing. I don't know why. I'd like to get in his head. I'd like to see what his writing process was. And I'd also love to see the different drafts of each script, because I think his writing process has got to be fascinating, and to see where it starts at to where it ends at, because there's so much going on there. And there's so much meta stuff in this movie that my brain's almost a little broken trying to dissect it.
Yeah, it's a lot to kind of, is as simple as it is in its initial kind of look into it. It seems like, oh, that's a simple. There's so much layering. It's I'm a big comic fan, and I hear like interviews with someone like Will Ferrell or somebody, and they go, yeah, our movies are dumb. He says, our movies are dumb. He says, but they're layered. And I thought about it, and I watched like Talladega Nights. And when I first saw it, I was like, that's a fucking stupid movie. And then what I'm getting at is, like, later I'd rewatch it, right? And then I'd watch it again. And I'm like, oh shit, it's funnier every time I watch it. There's something that sticks out. And they call that, and this is what him and, I forget what's Will Ferrell's writing partner?
Is it Danny McBride?
No, what's his name? The director. I can't remember. I just went.
Judd Apatow? No, he's.
No, it's damn it! I'm gonna shoot myself for not knowing. But nonetheless, we call it layering. So even though it seems simple, and like and I kind of, what I'm taking from that is, like, you're talking about McDonagh's writing capabilities, like trying to get into it, like. It seems simple, but I think if we rewatched it again a few times and you kept rewatching it and analyzing, like, there'd be even more layers that you could probably pull from.
Yeah, and that was kind of my point, is I'd like to know everything that he has going on, because it feels like I'm just not quick enough or smart enough to understand all the layers that he's got going on here, because I think he is definitely layering. And one thing I really liked is when Colin Farrell's character Marty says, I put a lot of heaven and hell stuff in my writing, but I don't know why. And he does that. Like, he absolutely does that. Like, if you look at In Bruges, the whole thing is a metaphor, I think, of biblical stories. And the whole thing is like biblical imagery and stuff like that. So I would love to see every little layer. Is this line of dialogue really just a throwaway line, or is there something more there? I feel like he's so smart and so sharp that I think he's adding stuff that I will just never understand.
And I think there's excuse me. I think there's also a bit of self-reflection. The title character, or the main character, is named Marty. Right. So it's almost his exploratory process in writing too. Like, right. When I watch it, I think, oh, he is Colin Farrell's character. This is the feelings that he gets sometimes. He's uncertain. He's unsure. He's like, I don't know how it ends, but I think it's this thing. Like, when he's talking about one of the psychopaths, he's talking about the Viet Cong member who's, and he's basically saying, look, I don't know how it ends, but I just know it ends in a horrible fashion.
Right.
I just know it ends completely violent. And so I think there's a little self-reflection in the writing too, where it's his own thoughts and feelings as he's writing what he's writing for this movie. And like I said, the main character's name's Marty. So I think there's that kind of tie-in and that kind of wink at the audience with that too.
And it almost feels a little Charlie Kaufman-esque.
Yeah, I mean, there's the interesting thing about McDonagh is that it almost feels like, and real quickly, just a side note, because I love McDonagh so much, it becomes easy, because I'm just like, I love his shit, everything he does. And he was talking about In Bruges. And they said, how did you write it? And he says, well, I was in Belgium and there was nothing to do. So I was in Belgium and I got drunk a lot. And and he's like, what if there were two friends in Belgium? And then that's literally the inception of how he started writing that film. So we're talking about, like, getting into his process, and I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but it almost feels like it's just his own experiences in a way. Like, if you look at In Bruges, you take a piece of your own experience, and then which was him being in Belgium and nothing to do. Like, when you watch In Bruges, Colin Farrell's character just wants to get drunk.
Yep.
Let's get a drink. Let's get a drink.
Yep, the whole time.
And the other character is more like straight-laced. Let's go sightseeing. Let's be a vacationer. And those were the feelings that he said in this interview that he was feeling. It was like, part of me just wants to get drunk and not want to see anything. And part of me wants to go see all the beautiful things that are out there. And he's like, what if there were two of them? And so what I'm getting at here is that I think even in Seven Psychopaths, with Marty the character and all the other psychopaths, they're just kind of thoughts and feelings that come to his head as he's writing. And I'm not trying to explain his writing process. Lord knows that would be a horrible idea. But those are some thoughts I have on it, And you mentioned that it's got a little Kaufman-esque vibe to it, and I can see that. And what's interesting to me is the very beginning also, to me, has a little bit of Coen Brothers. It feels a little Coen Brothers. Particularly for me, one of the things I was thinking about were the music choices. When you listen to the soundtrack and you listen to the song selections, I'm like, and I'm a big Coen Brothers fan. I thought, man, this has a very Coen-esque. Nothing's happening, but something's happening.
Right.
And there is violence instigated throughout it. And I just thought, this has a little Coen-esque. And come to find out, as I was doing some research, that music is written by Carter Burwell. And Carter Burwell is the film composer of most of the Coen Brother films. So there is a little bit of that too. You got a little maybe Kaufman, a little bit of Coen-esque vibe to how the movie how it unfolds.
Well, and speaking of filmmakers, that it feels a lot like, it does kind of feel like Guy Ritchie dialogue there when the two gangsters in the very first scene are talking about getting shot in the eye, and one doesn't understand, and the other one's talking down to him like he's an idiot. Like if you got 1,000 bullets being shot, one's bound to go through your eye, and the other guy doesn't understand how it's not a great shot. It feels like something out of Snatch. Like it like with Turkish and whoever that his little buddy was. I don't even remember who that was. It feels like something like that. And like In Bruges, the only problem I had with In Bruges wasn't with the movie, it was with the marketing. Because they marketed, I don't know if you ever saw the trailer for it, they marketed it like it was a Guy Ritchie film. Like they marketed it like it was a lot of violence and a lot of action. And so like Austin Hodgson, he's a good friend of mine. He didn't like In Bruges because of, and this is my theory of why he didn't like it. He said it was okay, but I think he was expecting, he loves Guy Ritchie. It's like his favorite director. I think he was going in thinking it was going to be that, and it wasn't. But there is some Guy Ritchie-esque things in there. I mean, it was almost even a little Tarantino with that dialogue at the beginning. And that's why you think you know what's going to happen. Like, you think you know what kind of movie it's going to be, and then it's just totally different. Like, it's almost like McDonagh is walking up to the audience and shooting them right there, because it's like, you think you know what's going to happen, and it's just not at all. It's like this movie called Seven Psychopaths. It's got a lot of big name actors in it, and you think it's going to be an action movie, and I'm just going to blow away your expectations right now, right off the bat.
Yeah, I can see exactly what you're saying, and I know a lot of people want to, like, they do that. Like, when you see something, we hear it all the time. You see a marketing trailer or something put together, and either you have a certain expectation about what that movie is, or you have seen the whole thing in 3 minutes.
Right.
And so, but for me, like, I've never associated the trailer to the film. So as weird as that is, or contrarian as that might be, like, I never go in with expectations, because I just want to be open as can be. Because I know, and then as you know, like, they cut those trailers a certain way. It's a science. Like, I've been in those rooms where they've cut those trailers, and I worked as an assistant editor doing it. And it's a science. It's a literal, here's how we're laying it out. And it takes months to build these trailers. And so I just never put that much weight into the portrayal of how they market it, because, but I can see where the misguidance happens, right? People get misguided and they go in thinking, I'm going to get this type of film. And then because the build has been so big and it doesn't deliver on that, then there's a sense of disappointment. So I get that too. You know?
And I don't understand why anyone would why any studio would put together a trailer that doesn't reflect what the movie's going to be, at least tonally. Like, you're just setting yourself up for disaster. Like, it's never going to work out well.
It's butts in seats, right? Like whatever is going to be enough action to pull them in, or a way to put something together. They're not so much interested in conveying the proper type of story that the film actually is, with the exception of those directors that have pull to do that. Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, when you cut a trailer, depending on how it works, either the marketing of the studio gets control of how that story is told in the trailer, or if they're big enough, the director gets the oversight. They get to tell people what to put in and what not to put in and how to say it. So you'll never see a Chris Nolan film that's not a Chris Nolan tone.
Right.
Because he gets the final word. But if you're a small director, or it's not as big, the studio's going to get control over the tonality of that trailer.
Well, do you know how well In Bruges did? I don't know. I'm going to look that up. I don't know what the budget was and how much they made on that. I can't imagine that they were raking in a lot of money on that movie.
I don't recall it doing very, very well, but if you look at Seven Psychopaths, it did actually pretty well. So it had an estimated budget of $15 million, and it looks like it came in at right around $33 million in the box office. And I can't imagine they spent 50% of the production budget on marketing, because it's a small film. So it probably did okay. Like, it probably did all right.
I actually just looked it up. So In Bruges, the budget was $15 million. They made the gross in the U.S. was $7 million, and the gross worldwide was $34 million. So they did good.
So they both did pretty well. I mean, because I think Seven Psychopaths is probably in that same ballpark, right around that.
Yeah, I would imagine.
So, kind of moving on into the story. So we kind of got off on a Martin McDonagh tangent and a a bit of a side note, but that's okay. Kind of moving on with Seven Psychopaths. One of the questions I wanted you to answer that I think we kind of jumped through was, as the story goes on. So you have Marty, played by Colin Farrel, who's a screenwriter. He's basically having a hard time, kind of like we talked about, beating those stereotypes as he's trying to write his new movie, and he's trying to figure out new ways to not show violence in a violent film, or a film titled, like you mentioned, Seven Psychopaths, which can only mean a few things. So then he has his friend, played by Sam Rockwell, whose name's Billy, and he later on it's revealed, of course, that he is one of the psychopaths, and he is the Jack O' Diamonds. But Marty doesn't know this. Marty's unaware of this until later in the film. And Marty has an associate by the name of Hans, played by Christopher Walken. And they, like we mentioned in the opener, they steal dogs and then they return them for rewards. And one of the interesting plot points, or one of the interesting, I should say, character arcs is Billy, played by Sam Rockwell, always wants to be part of his overall desire, his overall meaning in life is to have Marty invite him to help him write his screenplay. That's what he wants more than anything in the world.
And it makes me wonder if that was a little autobiographical, if Martin McDonagh's got someone in his life trying to elbow his way into his movies.
He's got it doesn't surprise me. I'm sure there's always someone trying to coattail their way into the writing process. That's how you got to do it to some degree, I would imagine.
Right.
But I think that story, that character development between the two is real funny, and it creates a fun dynamic between Marty and Billy. And Billy's a struggling actor slash killer. And he's always wanted, what if you're looking at the film, what was a scene in there that you found funny with the dynamic between Sam Rockwell and Colin Farrell? Was there anything there's probably a few, but can you think of something that stood out that you liked between those two?
From the every scene they're in together is gold. It's just pure gold from the very beginning. And the fact that that Billy really doesn't like Marty's girlfriend. And it's not because she's a bad person or because she's mean or a cunt like he keeps calling her or a bitch like he keeps calling her. It's because he is taking Marty away from him. Like she's taking Marty away from him. The way I look at the triage of Billy and Marty and Hans, it's almost like the 3 stages of life. Like you have Billy, who's like a 12-year-old boy. Like he can't fathom a movie that doesn't have a shootout at the end. Like he just doesn't understand how it's possible. And then you have Marty, who is like a regular adult, just trying to get through life without any conflict, and just trying to just, you know, he's got a drink to get through the day, and he's just a normal dude. And then you have Hans, who is the stoic old man, who is just kind of at peace with everything. He's got his faith, and he knows he's got questions about the faith, but that's okay. That's part of having faith. And it felt like it was like 3 stages of life, and that's why I loved watching Billy and Marty kind of interact, because it is kind of like an adolescent growing into a full-blown adult, a functioning adult. Every scene that they're in together is pure gold. It really is from the very beginning. I'm trying to think of one of my favorites. I think probably when they're in the car and they're talking about the movie, and Hans is there too. They're talking about the movie, and just Billy's reaction to no shootout. Like he's like, "What? No! Absolutely. What are you talking about? No shootout." Like he just can't fathom it. It's to me, that dynamic is golden.
Yeah, I think the chemistry between those two, you can't cast it any better.
You really
First,
can't.
you have these actors who by themselves could carry a movie. They're just phenomenal. I think Sam Rockwell is great. Of course, Colin Farrell. This is our second in the last few podcasts that we've had Colin Farrell as one of the leads in our in a film. We like Colin Farrell. We talked about that before with Killing of a Sacred Deer. So I think the chemistry between the two is, like you mentioned, it's dynamic. I think when you couple that with just fun, quirky, in some ways for Billy's character, adolescent writing, it's a very fun dynamic between the two. I mean, it's the silliest things. To me, it's always the littlest things that kind of grab me, like the smallest lines that just throw me off. And there's one in particular that Billy's going to Marty's house. So Sam Rockwell walks up. It's the morning. He knocks on the door. He's leaning his face against the glass, and Colin Farrell's girlfriend opens the door, and she's like, "Billy's writing today." She's basically like being a little bit snooty, like, "You can't come inside because Marty is writing today." And he's like, "What?" He's like, "Well, what are you doing?" And she's like, Are you doing yoga?" And then she's like, "I was." And he's like, and then he starts to work his way in the house. And then that slight line of like, "Can I watch?"
Right.
And you're just like, what is this? Who is this guy? Because even those little lines will make you go, okay, there's a little something off with that. Because no one says, "Hey, are you doing yoga? Can I watch?"
Well, it's him being like an adolescent child. Like it's almost like, this is way before either of our time, but in Leave It to Beaver, you had like the Eddie Haskell character. It's almost like he comes around like, "Hi, Mrs. Cleaver. What are you doing? Can I help you wash dishes?" Or like Dennis the Menace or something. You know, it just feels like a very childlike thing to do. And then obviously, you know, adolescent, he's a little perverted. He wants to watch her do yoga.
But that's it's an interesting comparison. I never thought we'd bring Leave It to Beaver.
I know, right? I don't know how.
Podcast.
I don't even know how I know any of those characters' names.
Hey, I think that was great. I think that was a great, and it is a little bit like that. He's kind of inviting himself in and kind of making his presence known. And once he gets in, this really upsets Marty's girlfriend, so she leaves, and then he starts lacing into her about how fucking stupid she is. He hates her so bad, and they get into their little adolescent quarrel. But just that dynamic, and like you said, the other one is the other scene that stands out in terms of the dynamic between Marty and Billy is later on when Marty finds out that Billy truly is a psychopath and he's killed a woman. And they're in the desert and they're getting getting some supplies. They come back to the campground, and this scene to me, when he confronts him, they go, first off, they say, let me get the Hans, who's Christopher Walken, says, hey, where's that peyote? I mean, it's naturally fitting. They're at Joshua Tree National Park in the desert. Peyote only makes sense. And once they start and Marty's drinking and Hans is doing peyote, and then Marty says to Billy, hey, are we going to talk about the elephant in the room here? And he's like, once they start, he's like, this scene, the dynamic between Marty confronting Billy, like, hey, I know who you are. I know you're a killer. I know you killed a woman. I can't associate with you. Like, my best friend is a psychopath. The whole response to him is hilarious. He's talking about, how he did it to motivate him to write the screenplay and all these kind of things. And you're just like, oh my gosh. And he's like, you shot a woman in the stomach. And he's like, well, at least I didn't shoot her in the face. It's like, just like little things. This scene kills me. And they try to get right before they try to get into the car to leave, because Marty's had it. He can't take it anymore. And then all of a sudden the car blows up.
Right.
The car blows up. And this scene's so funny. They run over. Marty thinks Billy's in the car. And he's like, Billy. And then Billy pops his head out of the tent.
He's like, don't be mad.
Don't be mad.
It's just like a little kid.
It's just a little kid. And he tells him that he's called the mafia gangster who they stole the dog from, and he's coming out. But he's agreed. Don't worry. He's agreed. He's agreed to come alone and unarmed.
And this is after they've already talked about earlier, when they're kind of pitching their movie ideas, how the mafia gangster guy, he's not going to come alone, even if he says he is. So it's like, are you so stupid? You even pitched us this idea. My favorite part about Billy in the whole movie is it's the littlest touch, but it's when Colin Farrell finds his diary, and on the diary it says, Billy's super secret diary, do not open. And it's just, that tells you everything you need to know about that character. And Sam Rockwell plays that just perfectly.
And can we say that the journal entry is hilarious, which is 7 a.m., stared at the neighbor's American flag. 7 p.m., still staring. 11 hours later, still staring at the flag. The follow-up entry to that is, don't burn the neighbor's flag.
Well, and it's not even the flag. He's watching the shadow come across his lawn. He's like, that's 11 hours.
11 hours.
11 hours. Note to self, don't burn the neighbor's flag. And then he looks and it's half burned. He is such a psychopath. He's like a child if they had the means to be an adult and go, live out every one of their fantasies.
And what he does good in the build of this character of Billy. I mean, first off, we mentioned Sam Rockwell's great, so that helps a ton by casting the right person. But additionally, what makes him is that you've got a psychopath, right? Somebody who is crazy, who is willing to kill someone for what he thinks are the right reasons. He thinks literally that if he kills someone, it'll help his friend. So he can't attach. He has a detachment. He's unaware that you don't, the moral code of not killing, but he thinks it's a good thing because he's helping his friend.
Can't understand why it's a problem.
They don't understand. So the childish nature of what that character is. And Sam Rockwell portrays that so
he's
good.
Just so good. Just perfectly cast, dead on.
In the plot, essentially, of the story, what's happened is Billy and Hans have stole Bonnie, who's a Shih Tzu, that's owned by Woody Harrelson, and essentially Woody Harrelson he has a complete breakdown with knowing his dog has been kidnapped or is gone. He's so attached to this dog. I think that dynamic's really kind of funny too, which is you have this hardcore mafia kind of Italian gangster guy played by Woody Harrelson who has a complete affinity for his dog and can't live without her.
And he is, if you would have described this character to me, I wouldn't have thought Woody Harrelson. First of all, he's supposed to be a high-ranking guy in the Italian-American mafia, and he's clearly not Italian. There's
blonde hair, blue eyes.
Exactly. Clearly not Italian. And secondly, I wouldn't have ever thought he could be very menacing, because Woody Harrelson's he's usually pretty funny. He's not ever really menacing. He's kind of got that, that country bumpkin, good old, he's almost like comforting. And he's actually pretty scary at points in this. Like when he's in the hotel room, or not the hotel room, the hospital room with Hansa's wife, like that's intense. And you can see the crazy, and you can see the intensity in his eyes. It's scary. And Woody Harrelson did a great job. Give him credit.
Yeah, that scene's really, really well done. And that, I forget her name, but the woman who portrays Hansa's wife, she's really good.
So good.
Really, really good. And Woody Harrelson, like you said, I think mostly we don't really see him that way. A lot of stuff that I see him in or in my mind's eye when I think about him, is something like, White Men Can't Jump, or, something like
Cheers,
even like Ed TV, or just something that's a little more, I guess. Of course, he has a couple others. Like you look at like The People versus Larry Flint. Like he's got some more. And the other one that he has a menacing kind of dynamic, of course, Natural Born Killers. But
even in that, I don't think he's very scary.
It's not the same type of scary.
Right.
I think the psychoticness is still there.
Right. Oh, no? For sure. I mean, you can see that recklessness, that reckless nature. But when he turned on the intimidation, it was surprising, because, like you said, you don't see him in that. He's got dramatic chops, and he's really good at being comical. But you don't really think. I mean, this is how old I am. I grew up watching Cheers, and so I still think of him as.
We'll go down a whole side tangent.
Yeah.
Alan. We could do a whole podcast on how much I love Cheers.
Cheers is like the perfect sitcom. It really is.
Good. It's so good. Sorry, I don't want to get too far into it, but I'm 100. It's funny because we've never talked about this before, but we can see eye to eye on Cheers.
Oh, I love it.
You bring up, that's in my top 10 TV shows of all time.
Ooh, really? It's way up there then.
100%. I can tell you the spectrum right now. The spectrum is Breaking Bad #1, without question, for me. Without question, Breaking Bad #1. And Cheers is going to fall in the top 10, the higher end of that spectrum, but it's going to be in there.
So without a doubt, Breaking Bad #1.
Without a doubt.
Interesting, huh? See, I went into Breaking Bad after hearing all the hype, and nothing can ever live up to hype. Like it just can't. So I was a little disappointed. I don't want to say disappointed. It's a phenomenal show, but I didn't love it as much as everyone else, because I think I was expecting something.
It's not even about. Yeah, I got you. It's not even about that everyone liked it. I mean, I watched it from the get-go. I watched it from the beginning all the way through, and then of course when season 3 started to put on Netflix, and it started to do that while they were still airing it on AMC. And it just, the fascination with me, when I saw the interview with Vince Gilligan about his development of the character, which he said it's Mr. Magoo meets Scarface.
Right.
I just went, done. That to me is you talk about writing, we were talking about Martin McDonagh, but the simplest of approaches to pitch an idea, we all can understand what that means. And then we follow that storyline, and it's phenomenal.
Well, where the idea came from is right after the X-Files was done.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I might as well go sell meth now. That's how I'm going to make money. And that's where the show came from.
Yep. So, but Cheers is great. I love Cheers. And Woody Harrelson's fantastic. There is that scene in Seven Psychopaths where we first meet him, essentially, and his dog's been kidnapped, and the woman who he had tending his dog and walking his dog, he's going to kill her. Like he's going to kill her, literally. He pulls the gun out and pulls, and it's an empty load.
And it jams. The gun always jams.
Yeah, that's what it is.
The way this scene is put together is just, it's so perfect. Like the pacing, the acting, everything about it, where he put the camera, like every single thing about that scene is perfect. It's the perfect scene. It's
and the
hilarious.
Timing of it too, where he pulls, the gun jams, he gets mad, hands the gun to one of his side.
He even apologizes to her.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This thing. His buddy goes, "Why don't you get a new one?" He's like, "Because I love the blue handle." Like, who thinks of that? Like, these are the kind of writing things that I think are so good, which is like the blue handle. Like, really, that's what you care about, is the blue handle? The gun doesn't operate.
Right, exactly. Well, and then how he lets her go too, but he can't just let her go. He's got to scare the shit out of her first. Like
Yeah.
it's everything about that scene is great.
And that's a great shot. You talk about technicality of the camera, and finally they get the gun to work, and he's like, "I'm sorry," and then he's got to scare the shit out of her. He shoots the gun, but it goes right past her, doesn't hit her, and then she's like in shock. You just see a close up of her face, and then it slowly pans up, and there's a smoke
Yeah,
hole in the wall,
love it.
and you're like, "It's so good."
It's
And you're
done
right,
so
that
well.
scene is just so. It's one of those scenes that's so simple. Like it's really a back and forth. It's like him, her, kind of just going back and
Right.
forth. And it's nothing overly complicated, overly dramatic, no huge technical approaches to the shots, but just really well done with timing and with performance.
Yeah, I agree. And then the introduction to the third guy, giving some important information about where the dog probably went after he already tried to kill her and
Right.
failed. You know, like it tells you everything you need to know about that crew, those people, what they're like. And it sets the whole movie up. I love it.
Yeah, he's great. His character is great. So he's on the hunt for his dog, is basically what it is. And this whole time, Sam Rockwell, has the dog. And eventually they get a little, they do some tracking down, some investigation. They find a way to get into this warehouse where Hans, Christopher Walken, and Sam Rockwell have been keeping all these kidnapped dogs. And they get to the warehouse where they're keeping them. But right before this, I want to say one thing about a scene where you have Colin Farrell and Sam Rockwell at that warehouse where they're holding all the dogs. Hans is not there because he's visiting his wife. He's visiting his wife at the cancer ward in the hospital. And there's this great little interaction between Billy and Marty where he's talking about the Irish, and he's talking about the curse of the Irish and alcoholism.
You know
and
what?
It's just it's a little poke at himself there.
I dropped the ball earlier when you were asking about favorite scenes between those two. I think that's it. Like it's the way Billy's just like, you're a writer and you're Irish. You're fucked.
Yeah.
It's so great.
You're done.
Yeah.
And they basically argue. Then Billy's reading the LA Weekly, and this is where, Colin Farrell is reading the LA Weekly, and Sam Rockwell is like, "Oh, hey, are you reading the LA Weekly? Oh, okay. Wait, did I give?" And he's talking about the other dog who they're not keeping at this warehouse. He's like, "Did I give Bonnie her water? Okay, well, I'm going to go give her water. I'll be right back." If you're reading the LA Weekly, he's like, "Jump to page 163. I may have put something in there that may or may not upset you, but and so he leaves Colin Farrell's character at the warehouse, and then you hear the voiceover.
Oh, it's great. It's great. The voiceover is great.
Calling all psychopaths.
I don't know. I am just in love with this movie at this point. Everything about it is great. Sam Rockwell, that whole thing where he's like, "Oh, wait, LA Weekly, wait, hold on." Like I was watching it with Jess, my girlfriend, and like right after he gets out the door and he's like trying to stop him from reading it until he walking out the door and he's like, "Okay, go ahead and read it." Like the way he played that, Jess is like, "Man, that was stressful," because he really you kind of feel like what is this guy doing? Like what is it? I don't understand his deal. And then you get to the payoff there. He's just everything that he does in this movie, and I sound like a broken record, but he's fantastic.
I think if you were an actor, right, or an aspiring actor, and we say this a lot, or I tend to say it a lot, but I really think it's true. If you were trying to do any kind of study into acting, I think Sam Rockwell is a good person to look at for timing. Like the ability to deliver a line of dialogue and the pace in which you move within a scene, the physicality, just simple stuff. He's so good at it. And it alludes to what you're saying, which is his slow movement backwards, and then his slow delivery of the lines, and then finally the payoff of like, "Hey, page 163.
Right. And he's putting on his jacket while he's walking backwards. He even bumps into the door. It's so well done.
Yeah, those physical movements are great. So then you hear the voiceover of this classified that he's put into the LA Weekly, which is basically calling all psychopaths. And he basically alludes to the fact that if you have this problem, or you've done this, he's trying to literally call anybody who is a psycho. And he's like, I'm helping my friend Marty write his screenplay, 7 Psychopaths. I just love that he adds it in there where he's helping his friend write the screenplay, even though, of course, Marty never invited him to write the screenplay.
And he's helping in the dumbest way again, like just the dumbest possible way.
Yeah, just a classified ad weekly.
Exactly.
So anyway, he's left, and so a little bit later, what ends up happening is Hans comes back to the warehouse. Marty is there, but Sam Rockwell, Billy, is not there. And they've done some work where Woody Harrelson's character and his boys and all his mafia guys find a way to the warehouse, and they go in, and there's this Woody Harrelson doesn't go, right?
No, he doesn't.
His boys is what I meant. So his henchmen go to the warehouse to try to find the Shih Tzu, and they have Hans and Marty held up by gunpoint. And you're like, oh man, someone might die here. And then out of nowhere, Jacko Diamonds with the mask on walks in and blows them down.
How convenient.
And walks away.
And the best part is Christopher Walken is not fazed by it at all, by any of that shit at all.
Which reminds me of one of my favorite Christopher Walken scenes in this entire film towards the end, when he's once again not fazed by guns at all. This is the point where his wife's been murdered by Woody Harrelson's character. He gives a shit about nothing in a sense, right? He still does, but he doesn't. And he leaves the desert because there's a little feud between Billy and Marty. And as he's walking away, Woody Harrelson's henchmen run across him in the desert on the road, and they hold him up by gunpoint. And they're like, put up your hands. And he's like, no.
Why not? I don't want to.
I don't want it. That doesn't. And then I love the response of the henchman.
Like, this is a gun. This is a gun.
It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
So anyway, I just love that nature of him, and he does that before. You're right. In this warehouse scene, he doesn't give a shit either.
Right.
He's unfazed. But ultimately, Jacko Diamond saves the day.
How convenient. And we find out why later.
Yes. So kind of moving on, ultimately, Woody Harrelson finds who took his dog after it's kind of revealed to the audience that the person who took his dog is Billy, and Billy has been sleeping with Woody Harrelson's girlfriend. And so that's where he kind of was introduced or knew who the Shih Tzu was. And while that scene, while he's attempting to have sex with his girlfriend and he can't, and he's just talking about how limp his dick is.
Look at that limp piece of shit.
He's just like, look at that limp piece of shit. And then she says, it's okay. And take off. She says, take off the rubber. And she's like, it's okay. I trust you. And he's like, trust me?
You're still dating that mafia guy.
You're still dating that mafia guy.
Who knows what he gave you?
And then she gets all mad. He's like, well, I don't mean AIDS.
I just meant chlamydia or something, baby.
Chlamydia or something. That whole scene is just ridiculously funny. But nonetheless, that's where it's revealed that she gets up. She's upset. She calls her boyfriend. And during the call, Billy gets a call from Hans. And Hans, what has happened is that, of course, Woody Harrelson's character has, in the hunt for Hans and trying to find his dog, runs across his wife at the hospital and kills her. And so Billy gets a call from Hans saying, hey, Myra, my wife, is dead. And it's kind of interesting because someone who is now later revealed as a psychopathic killer, he has a little bit of emotion to the response of hearing that his friend's wife is dead.
Yeah, that's the one thing I'll say is I'm not sure, I like reading about serial killers and all that kind of weird shit. Everyone does these days. It's popular. So I will say Martin McDonagh probably doesn't know really what a psychopath is, because a psychopath doesn't have any moral code. And everyone in this movie has a moral code. Even Woody Harrelson, like probably the closest to a psychopath that we get, has a moral code, and it's his dog.
Dexter.
Now Dexter, but again, not a real psychopath.
Could be.
Well, you know what? Could be because he was taught by his dad to do that because his dad saw the signs.
He was taught to hide the emotion.
That's right.
Or
to fake it.
Or to show the emotion
Yeah.
even though he didn't feel it.
Right. And he was taught to go after the depraved.
Yeah.
So make it more.
So there's a bit of a code there, essentially, in some sense.
Good point.
But we digress. Nonetheless, what happens is that Billy, it's revealed that while his girlfriend or Woody Harrelson's girlfriend is on the phone, he shoots her in the stomach, and then the reveal is a card. He throws the Jack O'Diamond's card on the ground by her, and that's the big reveal that he is that first person that we talked about in the opening scene. He is that psychopath. He's also the psychopath at the warehouse who had saved Marty and Hans when the henchmen of Woody Harrelson came to the warehouse. And so now we know that he is psychopath number 7, as well as psychopath number 1.
And I think most movies would have saved that twist towards the end. But
yeah, he kind of reveals it right there. And that's what's interesting is the reveal there is that, or at least more towards the end, but nonetheless, like, what's going to happen now is that we're going to kind of play it out as Marty sees it, which is like, let's go to the desert and be peaceful. And then we're also going to play it out as Billy sees it, which is like, let's go to the desert for the best shootout ever.
Right. And it's that the whole thing, the whole shootout idea is hilarious. And honestly, there was a point there where I'm wondering, are they going to do the shootout or are they not going to do the shootout? Because he's already talked about how he doesn't want to have a shootout in his movie. And this feels, like a very autobiographical character. So is he not going to do it or is he going to do it? Because they keep teasing it. And thank God they did it because it was awesome.
Yeah, it's cool too because after he kills the girlfriend, he runs back to Marty and Hans and he gets there just in time for him to take those two to the desert before Woody Harrelson shows up at their apartment. They drive out to the desert and they're having the conversation about the shootout, and they're having the conversation about the different psychopaths in the screenplay, like the Viet Cong character, the psychopath. That scene that I love that you're kind of that is when they're pulling up and you see there's a cross on the big rocks, a Christian cross, and he's like, "Oh, that's the perfect place for a shootout." I mean, I know we're not going to have a shootout, but if we were going to have a shootout, that would be the perfect place for a shootout.
So I wonder where they have it at the end in a perfect place.
So I just love that he puts it all on the nose and then he pays it off. I think that's kind of hard to do, which is like, I'm going to tell you what happens and then we're going to have it still happen and still be interesting or still leave you up in question. Like you mentioned, you're like, are they going to have it? Are they not?
Right.
And it kind of keeps the ball rolling because otherwise, if you just tell people what's going to happen and then you show them what's going to happen, it doesn't quite pay off, but somehow he's able to make it work where he tells you and then he shows you.
Right. And one thing I do want to say that we missed was the second psychopath, which is the Quaker, because I think that story with the Quaker is so good and it's so clever. And it's like one of those things. It's like, man, I wish I would have thought of that and turned it into a short. And Harry Dean Stanton plays the Quaker, and man, does he do a good job. I mean, it's just... it's creepy. It's good. It's like the perfect type of redemption story. And basically, I mean, the twist at the end is like, the only place where the Quaker won't be able to follow you is in hell. And the only way to get to hell is to kill yourself. So the guy kills himself. And what does the Quaker do? Pulls out a blade and slits his own throat. I just thought that was just so well done. And I loved it. And then you find out later that it's Christopher Walken, only he didn't die. Like, that's pretty cool. Like Christopher Walken was a psychopath. And this is why I say that he's a typical kind of, like, the three of them are the different stages of life. Like, he is definitely an old man where he even says in the car, like, at the time I thought it was the right thing to do to terrorize this guy who killed my daughter, but now I'm not so sure it was. And he's definitely the old wise man, and he kind of sacrifices himself at the end. And that whole storyline I thought was great.
Yeah, that psychopath number 2 with the Quaker is great. And you mentioned like that would have been one you would have loved to have created and made a short film based off of that, after that character.
Yeah,
absolutely. And Harry Dean Stanton, fantastic. And he's also in one of my favorite movies called Paris, Texas. So you should watch that one.
I've never seen it.
It's so good. by a German filmmaker named Wim Wenders, and it's a great movie. Played at Sundance in 1984. But that character of the Quaker is really good. I love one of the things that we haven't mentioned quite yet is, and it alludes to what you're saying, which is the way that McDonagh creates little stories within the big story. So the Quaker is an example of one of those, but he uses the Psychopaths arc of their own stories and he interlaces them into the bigger picture. So you have the Quaker, and then you have the Viet Cong, and that story is quite interesting too, where you have this guy who's been his family's been murdered by Charlie Company back in Vietnam, and his whole thing is retribution. He wants to kill everyone who killed his family. I mean, that's even an intriguing story, and I think it's saying a lot about It's saying a lot of things in a very small packaged format.
Definitely.
That one's interesting to me. And then I love how at the end where Christopher Walken, after they take the peyote and things things calm down a little bit, how finally Christopher Walken he participates in helping Marty write his screenplay, helping Colin Farrell write a screenplay. Colin Farrell was struggling with that Viet Cong character. He's like, what do I do? He thought initially it was just going to be gore and violence all the way throughout, and he was going to get revenge and retribution for them killing his family. I got to say, in the first rendition of that, where Colin Farrell's talking about the Viet Cong guy getting retribution, you had to have loved that because there's some gore and blood in there.
Not only that, but the Tom Waits story, when Tom Waits comes and tells his story, I loved that whole sequence because it is just total gore.
That's why this podcast warrants almost another podcast, because we haven't even talked about Tom Waits yet.
I know, we really haven't, because he's great in this too.
Like the cast, once again, you think, oh, I got Colin Farrell, we're good. That's all I need.
Yeah, right.
And then you're like Sam Rockwell, Woody Harrelson, Christopher Walken.
Right.
And just to throw a sprinkle on, we'll have Tom Waits in the film. What?
Usually you would think that Christopher Walken would be the sprinkle on top of just Colin Farrell. Yep. And it's like, we'll get a supporting, legendary actor in Christopher Walken. But they keep going, man. How he got all these guys, I don't know.
I don't know either. But that Viet Cong character, when Walken gives him the idea that instead of having him have retribution on everyone killing his family, his version of that is that he's a Buddhist monk.
Yeah.
And he's instead of getting retribution for the war that happened in Vietnam and all the killing and the murderous nature of what that was, he's a monk who defies and what's the word I'm looking for?
Emulates. Are you talking about setting himself on fire?
No, yes, but what's the word? He not defies. He in protest of violence, in protest of war, he emulates him. Is it emulates?
Emulate. Yeah.
He burns himself.
Right.
And which is a true story of people who were in protest against the war. When that happened, some of these monks set themselves on fire. Yeah,
that very famous Rage Against the Machine cover has that very famous photo of the monk immolating himself.
Yeah. So I like that he changes the character. Initially, you think he's going to be a psychopath. You think that he's going to go the direction of the violence, and then he goes the direction of peace and protest.
It's still violent, though. It's just self-violence.
It's still super violent. It's still extremely hard to fathom and to watch.
Right.
But yes, in a different way. But I think the notion of it, this is going to sound controversial, but I think the notion of it's good, which is the nature of him just getting retribution and murdering for the sake of murdering, right? For getting revenge versus protesting the fact that this is happening. Like there's a little different weight to how those compare.
Right.
But I like that Walken throws that into it. So he essentially helps him kind of build that character in the screenplay. And you almost wonder, once again, did someone like throw him an idea about, hey, instead of doing this, try that? And you're like, yeah. And then he like uses that thing, like you were saying before, like the person who's always trying to jump in your story.
It feels
jumped
like
in the right way.
It feels like, and that's one reason why I didn't get lost at points, but I think I was taken out of the story a little bit because it feels like there are a lot of anecdotes going on. And in a film called Seven Psychopaths, you expect like all the psychopaths to be real, but only 2 of them I think are actually real.
We got to do the math on that because psychopath number 1 is Jack of Diamonds.
Yep. So
Psychopath number 2 is the Quaker.
The Quaker. 3 was, I can't remember who 3 was. What? I think no. 4 was the Vietnamese guy, the Vietnamese priest. 5 and 6 were Tom Waits and his wife.
We'll get into those real quick in just a minute.
Right, and then 7 was Sam Rockwell again. So we're missing 3. I can't remember who 3 is.
Well, number 2 is Woody Harrelson.
Oh, that's right. Woody Harrelson.
That's right. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on.
So I just felt like I wasn't sure where the story ended, and then the story within the story began. Like it just kind of felt confusing, and it was kind of floating around in there. And I mean, it's not bad. I mean, it's still very good. And even when you're in these extra stories, it's still very well done and very entertaining. But I would have liked to seen the story be a little bit more cohesive. I mean, you can throw that stuff in there. It just seems like he got lost a little bit in the side stories, like I said. And
yeah,
that's the only knock I have.
There's a lot of short stories happening in the bigger picture.
Right. And that's not bad. It just wasn't, I just wasn't feeling it a whole lot. That's the only knock I really have on this movie at all. So not quickly even, but just to kind of get it moving here. Essentially as they have a showdown. What happens is that Marty and Billy are in the desert, and sure enough, like we mentioned before, after burning the car and blowing up the car, he had called Woody Harrelson's character and told him to come alone and come unarmed. He does. And then they're shocked. They're shocked when he comes alone.
Yeah, which is what Billy was saying the whole time.
Right.
That you would never think would happen, and sure enough, it does happen.
Right.
And he shows up, and when he shows up unarmed and all alone, Billy tells him to turn around, show him so he can lift up his shirt to make sure there's no gun, and he shoots him in the back. And so he's like, "You just shot him," and Colin Farrell's like, "You shot him in the back," and he's like, "Yeah, I was going for the spine." And it doesn't kill him; it's missed him. It's not a fatal shot. And so there's not really a shootout. They're kind of it's not the climatic shootout didn't happen, at least quite yet.
And then when this happens, I'm thinking like that was the shootout. Like he's really going to go down this road, and that's what we're going to get for the big shootout that's been teased. Like he's really going to go along with this whole anticlimactic thing that he's been building up.
And it goes back to that question that we were saying before, which is like, will it happen? When's it going to happen?
Right.
Is it going to happen? And then you kind of think, yeah, hey, that was it.
Right.
But sure enough, Colin Farrell says, look, I'm going to take this. He's got that moral code because he's a person. He's like, I'm going to take the injured Woody Harrelson to the hospital in this car that he's brought, and that's it. And that he starts driving to the hospital.
Well, my favorite part is when he gets in the car, he takes a pull off the whiskey bottle and then throws it out. And Woody Harrelson goes, "Is he drinking and driving?" That's your big worry right now, huh?
That's your worry right now. You're bleeding to death.
Yeah.
So they end up driving away, and then as they're driving away, they run across Woody Harrelson's henchmen. They stop the car, and sure enough, they turn back because Sam Rockwell still has the Shih Tzu. He still has Woody Harrelson's dog, and Woody Harrelson's not fatally wounded. So they turn around and they go back. And right before, what's also interesting is Billy says to Marty, "Hey, you want this gun? And Marty goes, no, I don't want the gun. He's like, I'm not a man of violence.
Right.
And as they're driving away 10 minutes later, as the henchmen stop him with the gun, Woody Harrelson goes, I bet you wish you would have taken that gun. And he's like, no, I'm not. But they go back, and as they go back, this is where we get the climactic shootout.
Right. Well, and before this, Woody Harrelson's henchman killed Hans. And Hans kind of sacrificed himself because he saw the cops were pulling up, and he knew that his friends were going to be in big trouble if the henchmen go and find them. So since he saw the cops pulling up, he acted like he was pulling out a gun. The henchmen shoot him so that the cops will stop them. I mean, they don't. But the thing that I thought was kind of funny, though, was once Colin Farrell gets back and he sees that Hans has been shot, he tries to run up to the body, and there's a cop there. And he stops him. He's like, he's my friend. And it's like, oh, okay, go right ahead. Go search out, and he pulls the tape out of his clothes. It's like, that's not at all what would happen. They would have it roped off. And especially if you were a friend, they wouldn't want you to see him.
Yeah, because the tape is basically Christopher Walken giving him ideas about the Viet Cong character.
Right.
And that's how he finds out how to change it later in the screenplay.
Right.
But yeah, the absurdity of like the cop going, yeah, this is not a murder scene.
Right.
Go ahead and jump in.
Not only that, but tamper with the evidence by going through his pockets and taking stuff. It's ridiculous.
It's old school Joshua Tree police.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but he does get the tape that has some of that stuff. But when they go back, there's basically now we have a standoff, like a real standoff, and Billy starts just mowing down the henchmen and shooting the henchmen. They crash the car. He starts shooting up. He's got guns. He's shooting them up. And then Woody Harrelson, Charlie, starts to, they have a little standoff. They each have a gun, but Billy's holding a gun to Bonnie's head. He's holding the dog's head.
Wasn't he holding a flare gun to the dog's head?
Yeah, it's a flare gun. So he starts threatening that he's going to kill the dog. And so, of course, that kind of holds Woody Harrelson back a little because he doesn't want his dog dead. He loves his dog to the end of the earth. And then it just kind of ends in the sense that Woody Harrelson shoots, and he said, and Billy says, the movie ends my way, essentially. He shoots and he's dead.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, there was a shootout. Don't get me wrong. There was a shootout. If you're listening to this, there is a shootout, but it does just kind of end right there with Billy now dead.
There's no real, satisfaction. There's no real closure, I should say. There is a little bit later because it's not quite the ending, but it's close enough where I thought with Billy, man, I kind of wanted to see him live. There's a weird thing about Billy because as much of a murderous psychopath as he is, he's endearing. You like him. Very endearing.
I do. But he's dead. And one thing we wanted to mention is when he made that ad in the LA Weekly, this is where Tom Waits' character actually comes into play. He's the one that responded to the ad and sits down with Colin Farrell to tell him his story. And his story is about him and his wife who go on a murderous rampage.
They go around killing serial killers. So they have the Dexter mentality. Yeah. They killed the Texarkana guy. They killed another dude. I mean, when she's sawing that guy's head off in the mental ward, I loved every second of it. It was amazing. And then later on, they find the Zodiac, and they stab knives through his hands so he can't leave the table. So they stab through the hands into the table so he can't move. They dump gasoline on him and set him on fire. And it's so good. I loved it.
And so with that, one of the things while he was conveying this story, his name is Zachary, played by Tom Waits. And while he's relaying this story to Marty, he's like, the only thing that I ask in return for this story that I'm telling you and all these truths is that you give me recognition and you leave a message at the end of the film because he left the woman that was doing all these things with him, Bonnie, or not Bonnie, I'm sorry. I'm trying to remember her name now.
Is it Maggie?
Maggie, thank you. So he says, I still love her, but we split ways after that because we kind of differentiated. We didn't think the same way. It was kind of getting to him, essentially killing him.
Yeah, he didn't enjoy the murder as much as Maggie did.
Yeah, she loved murdering
it.
people.
Yeah, she loved it.
And so his whole thing is just give this message to her at the end of the film. And what I find funny in the line is that Marty says, I will. He says, I'll put my life on it.
I promise on my life.
I promise my life.
Way over the top. Well, I just say, yeah, okay.
Essentially, he responds to saying, "Hey, that's a big promise." So once Billy's now dead, what ends up happening right after they shoot him? Marty gets in the car. He gets away. Right before, I should say, Marty gets in the car and gets away. Essentially, Billy lets Marty get free, by holding Bonnie the dog hostage. Marty is free from Woody Harrelson's character. He takes the car and drives off. After he frees his friend, he basically makes sure his friend is quote unquote safe. That's when he gets shot. He dies. And right after Sam Rockwell dies, the cops show up. And sure enough, they basically bust Woody Harrelson for this murder. Then it goes on to the fact that Marty has now finished the screenplay. He actually wrote it all. It's sometime later. I can't remember the exact time and space, but it's sometime later. And the movie is showing in the theaters. And Marty comes out of and receives a call from Zachariah. This is Tom Waits.
And if I'm not mistaken, this is like a post-credit scene, right? Like this is after the credits, I think.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of that punch payoff at the end. He gets a phone call from Zachariah, and he basically says, remember that, because what's ended up happening is that Marty forgot to give that recognition and that message at the end of the film. And Tom Waits' character, Zachariah, basically says, I'm not going to let you forget it. I'm going to come after you.
I'll be there on Tuesday.
I'll be there on Tuesday. And that's
the idea that he's telling him exactly when he's going to come kill him.
Yeah. And what's funny is I find is like Marty kind of like reconciles it. He's like, yeah, okay.
Okay, I'm not doing anything Tuesday.
I made the promise.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the end of the film. And just a whole bunch, like we mentioned, a whole bunch of things going on, a lot of interesting characters, a lot of arcs. We jumped around a little bit in some of the chronological order of what the film is, but I think we broke it down with some fun scenes and some fun character dynamics. Give me, Alan, kind of your wrap up and your rating.
Love this movie. I did get, and I don't want to harp on the negative, but it definitely takes it down a little bit for me. Just there's a lot going on, and I didn't feel like the story was quite, I don't want to say cohesive. It didn't have enough follow through. It didn't have enough drag the entire time. Like it kind of just puttered out a little bit and then got interesting again. So there's just like this section in the middle that just kind of left me wanting a little bit more. It's still very entertaining during that part, but it just feels like they just abandoned that story for a minute. And I also don't understand, like, all of a sudden they're in the desert. Like, there's no saying, let's go, we got to go hide. Or, it was just, and I kind of liked that they didn't give that exposition. And they kind of explained it earlier on when they said, the characters will just go out into the desert and talk. And so they kind of let you know what was happening, but it still was just like all of a sudden they're in the desert. And then now this is where we're at now. Like, we're not in Hollywood. Now we're officially just, the movie's been changed locations, and they didn't prepare you for this, really. Not a big deal, but it still, took me out a little bit. But overall, like I said, casting, great job. Writing, phenomenal. Acting, phenomenal. Direction, phenomenal. Everything about this movie was great. I'm going to go 8.2 final shootouts.
Nice. No final shootout?
No what? Final shootout. What? No. What? No.
No shootout.
So angry about it. You just can't even can't fathom that there's a movie without a shootout.
which is a play on. I think it's a play on some people's feelings about action films in general to the mass population, which is like, if there's no shootout, there's no film.
I agree.
Yeah, good wrap up. Just a couple quick things. IMDb comes in at 7.2. I thought it'd be higher.
I did too.
I thought it'd be higher. Rotten Tomatoes comes in at 82% on the critics and 71% on the audience. So it's there. I mean, it's fresh.
I'm interested. That's interesting. I wonder why the audience doesn't like it as much. I mean,
I can see the critic in this one. You know, we look at these a lot of times. The audience and the critics, as we know, never see eye to eye. And so, but I can see why the critics would come in higher here. I think it's because of the nod and the subtextual references to Hollywood and the dynamics of the meta approach to how the story's told.
I guess I'm looking at it and I'm just like, what's not to like? Like it's got the best cast, it's got great writing, great direction. I wonder what it is that's holding that score down more.
Yeah, I mean, I think 71% is a little low. I would definitely say that.
Feels like it.
Yeah, I would definitely go with a little bit low. A couple quick pieces of trivia, and then you can chime in if you've got anything that you think you find interesting. Tom Waits, we didn't talk enough about him. I think I was introduced to Tom Waits later. I don't know if you like his music. I do like some of his stuff, but he's an animal lover. Apparently, he agreed to the role without reading the script.
Oh shit!
Upon hearing he would be surrounded by rabbits, something we neglected to mention, which was his character is surrounded by rabbits.
And there's got to be some sort of symbolism that I'm missing about the white rabbit, because he carries it around with him everywhere.
So here we go back to this. I was saying, you know, one of the things that got me into Martin McDonagh was his short film, Six Shooter, his first film. And it's all at the end of that film, without giving it away, because I think people should go watch it. You can find it on YouTube or anywhere, there's a rabbit. So I don't know if he has, it's kind of, not that it's a nod to his previous films, but he just has this kind of, I'm going to find a way to incorporate this thing into my movie.
Kind of like John Woo, how he always has doves in his movies.
Yeah, but this is cooler than doves.
Oh, way cooler, yeah.
No offense, I actually like John Woo, but in it for a different reason. The premiere of the film, Sam Rockwell and Colin Farrell wore matching shirts with a cartoon depiction of their co-star Christopher Walken on them.
You know what? That makes me so happy, because it feels like the relationship they had in the movie is real. Like it makes me think that it's real, and I want it to be real.
You know, those guys are just buddies.
Oh, they gotta be.
Yeah. I saw a little behind the scenes that I thought was funny, and it was Colin Farrell and Sam Rockwell, both in the ears, each on the side of Tom Waits. And they're like, who's your favorite? Who's your favorite? Who's your favorite? I'm your favorite. Sam's your favorite. Colin's your favorite. Sam's your favorite. And they just kept going back. You could tell they had a pretty good friendship. I thought that was pretty funny. Here, instead of a traditional red carpet at the premiere, Seven Psychopaths had a black carpet to match the mood of the film.
Oh my God.
I just think that's kind of funny. This is the dumbest one, and then we'll wrap it up. But I think it's funny because it alludes to a scene we talked about with Billy setting the car on fire. He says, after Marty sees the car on fire and they run over, Billy instructs him, get in the tent, Dumbo. Later, Colin Farrell would star in the movie Dumbo.
Oh my God.
I told you it was dumb.
I have a good one.
The line's funny.
It is funny. I have a good one. It's not about the movie. It's about Christopher Walken. Apparently,
can't go wrong there.
He has never turned down a role. Ever.
I think that's great.
I do too. But that does explain why he's been in some pretty bad movies. He's always the best part of those movies, though.
It's like, yeah, it's okay though. It's like it's excusable.
Yeah, I'm fine with it. I'm totally
Yeah.
fine with it. Like what was that movie about the ping pong? It actually wasn't that bad, but Balls of Fury, I think is what it
Balls
was
of
called.
Fury,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's
Horrible movie, but I remember liking Walken.
yeah, he made it good. Like not good, but he made it at least entertaining. Where because it is a terrible movie. So I have a quick trivia, not a trivia, but multiple choice. Two choices.
Okay.
Who has the bigger filmography without looking? Christopher Walken or Samuel L. Jackson?
Ooh, wow. I mean, you just got done telling me that Chris Walken has never said no to a
Never
role.
said no to a role.
And he's older. So I'm going to say Walken.
Nope. Jackson.
I knew it'd be too easy.
Yeah, I know. Well, so Christopher Walken, 138 credits, which is a lot. That's a lot of movies.
That's a ton.
Samuel L. Jackson, 189.
Oh, he's pushing the 200.
He's getting there. He'll be there. If they're making movies this year or next year, but that's a big if, then he'll definitely.
As soon as they come out of the COVID shutdown,
exactly.
He's gonna tack on another 10.
Yeah. And I guess these aren't all movies either. They're TV appearances too, but still, it's
right. That's a lot of credits.
That's insane.
Well, hopefully we see more of both of them because they're both on our list of national treasures.
They are.
So they could make another 200. I'd be happy.
Oh yeah, they're always the best part of anything they're in. Although absolutely. I will say in this, I think Sam Rockwell may have upstaged Christopher Walken.
Yeah, I agree. I really do, and I love both of them. But Rockwell takes the cake.
Yeah, which is saying something because this might be off the top of my head. Let me say. This is probably my favorite Christopher Walken performance.
It's up there.
Yeah, it's
definitely
good.
Up there.
Very good.
I know this sounds absolutely absurd, but I do love him in Batman Returns.
Oh, he's fantastic. Fantastic. That
good.
At the very end, like I don't know why this line sticks out to me, but it's just so Christopher Walken when he's like, Bruce Wayne, why are you dressed up like Batman? It's just like, it's so perfect. It's so perfect. Love that guy.
He's great. He's absolutely great. And so I agree with you on the casting. The casting's great. It's one of the best cast films that I can think of. We've done almost 30 films now, and there's been a lot of great actors in each of those films, of course, as would be expected. But I think if you look at the ensemble, the setup of these, this is a huge, phenomenally talented cast. So even if you wrote a shitty movie, it might be interesting.
That's a good point.
Now, with that said, I'll go back to my wrap up here, and then my original statement, which is Martin McDonagh is a huge admiration for Martin McDonagh as a screenwriter. Like I mentioned, even read some of his plays. There's just something about the way he creates characters, the way he creates dialogue, the way he pushes the story that to me is intriguing because it's different in his own unique way. I think this film for me is definitely up there. I think I can see where the story becomes a little convoluted, like you had mentioned, but I think it's primarily because you could take the 3 or 4 micro stories that are in this bigger picture and go make a complete feature film around those stories. So you have 4 or 5 stories
Agreed.
that in their own right could be their own film.
I mean, like I said, it doesn't take away from it. It was just a little distracting, I guess.
Yeah, no, I get the convolution of it. But with that said, like I said, huge Martin McDonagh fan. Now I came in Bruges at a 10. It's the only thing I've ever rated perfect. You can go back and listen to episode 2 of the podcast and figure out why. I won't go over all those things here again. For those listening, listen to episode 2 in Bruges. I really get into it. I love it. It's one of my favorite movies. This film, I also love, although not in the same way that I love in Bruges. So I'm going to come in with a pretty high score still, because I always base it off a few things, but one of the primary things that I put into my weighted score is, can I watch this repeatedly over and over? Could I watch it more than once? Like, I could go home right now and could I watch it? You know, there's films you can't do that with. For me, there's films I cannot do that with, but this is one of those films. So I'm going to come in at an 8.9.
Ooh.
Yeah, just under 8.9 rabbits.
Ooh, I like that too. I wish I would have thought of that one. That's way better. 8.9. That's a high score.
It's a good movie, Alan.
It's good.
Is.
So I know we didn't. I'm not going to hold you to this, but what, like off the top of your head, what would you give to 3 Billboards?
Yeah. So if I look at this, I gotta watch 3 Billboards again. I've only seen it twice, once in theaters and then once later. Right now, I go In Bruges. Well, if I look at his 3 films, he's only done 3 feature films. So I go In Bruges, 3 Billboards, 7 Psychopaths.
Oh man.
so I don't know the score, but that's the order. So you know it's got to be above 8.9.
Wow. It's a good movie. It's a very good movie. Powerful
movie. That's the thing. Like, it's a different type of movie than what this is. This is fun and a dark comedy, as is In Bruges. 3 Billboards is very powerful and moving in a different way.
Man, how would that be? Like, you're a filmmaker, your first movie, your first feature is In Bruges, and then you follow it up working with Christopher Walken in 7 Psychopaths, and then you come out with 3 Billboards. Like, it's the talent this guy has. He's got more talent in his fingernail on his pinky than I have in my entire body, than most people have in their entire body.
His talent is unbelievable. His unique approach to writing is unbelievable. So yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Like, what can you say wrong? Playwright, screenwriter, director Martin McDonagh, 2012 film 7 Psychopaths. Go also watch 6 Shooter. If you have not seen that, that's his first film. It's a short film, but it's great. Won the Academy Award for Best Short Narrative. And go check tameaperture.com for more episodes. Also, reach out to us for future episodes, what we can review, and be part of our discussion. This is Alan and Gabe with the Tame Aperture podcast signing out. Take care, y'all.
I just realized she's not even in Hereditary. That's Toni Collette. What the fuck was I thinking?
Tame Aperture podcast is produced by Dutch Angle Pictures in association with Studio B Productions. Listen, watch, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and YouTube.